Welcome to China Perspectives. My name is Yin Wang, Head of North Asia Industrials, Property and Consumer at Fitch Ratings. In today's podcast, I'm joined by Sabrin Chowdhury from BMI, a Fitch Solutions company that provides independent market insights, data, and analytics. BMI launched rare earths coverage in 2025 and now offers the most complete rare earths coverage in the industry. Sabrin joined BMI in 2015, and she is based in Singapore. She leads BMI's commodity analysis and price forecasting, managing a global team that covers 24 commodities across energy, industrial, and precious metals, soft commodities, and grains. Sabrin, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
My pleasure.
I read your report published last October, which is titled Rare Earth Security, Prices, Geopolitics, and the Battle for Power. It's a highly comprehensive and insightful report. It makes it pretty clear that China remains at the center of the global rare earths industry, from mining to refining and export controls. So I would like to focus our podcast today on what that dominance means for global supply, pricing, and the other countries' efforts to diversify away from China. First of all, why has China been able to build and maintain such a strong dominant position across the entire rare earth supply chain, not just in mining, but especially in processing and refining?
Well, being endowed with so much of these natural rare earth reserves has definitely been the greatest advantage for China. Now, that said, China understood the importance and significance of its rare earth reserves, and China acted really early on in commercializing this. So they now have the absolute advantage of time. They had an excellent strategy from the very start. They focused not just on mining, but also the midstream, which is the processing side. So while most of the Western narrative, even today, still focuses on access to reserves and mines, China's near monopoly that they have reflects 5 entire decades of building up processing expertise, also building up scale efficiencies and environmental tolerance that globally most others have avoided. Now, the US and Europe combined have spent roughly $2 billion on critical mineral access, whereas China has invested nearly $57 billion in critical minerals between 2000 and 2021. Now, going forward, there's state-led consolidation, production quotas, and export controls that will help to reinforce Chinese dominance on rare earths, despite ongoing efforts to reduce dependence on Chinese supply. Now, while efforts to break China's dominance by the West especially will intensify further as the years progress, China's entrenched production capabilities, technological expertise, and comparatively lower costs will ensure that its market dominance remains.
Right. Well, that being said, I think China still depends on Myanmar for heavy rare earth feedstock, right? So how big of a vulnerability is that for the global supply chain, especially given the instability in the Kachin state and the disruption to mining and exports there?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So Myanmar is the second largest mine producer of rare earths globally. It accounts for around 11% of global output. So its mining sector remains underregulated. It is predominantly controlled by informal players. So that definitely poses significant supply side risk, particularly for the heavy rare earth elements that China imports mainly from Myanmar. So just an example of this, in 2024, temporarily when the Kachin Independence Army took control of the area that is responsible for most of the rare earth mining in Myanmar, at that time, imports to China significantly declined. Now, imports have rebounded again. It's largely back to normal now. So there are risks for sure. Definitely there are risks. But as we have seen the elections earlier in the year, it concluded in January. We saw the military-backed Union Solidarity and Development Party take over. They secured a walkover win in Kachin State. aligned with their nationwide landslide victory. So, given Beijing's growing diplomatic and financial support of the military leadership in Myanmar, we do believe that risks to China's imports of Myanmarese rare earths are likely to be mitigated to some extent, but of course, the risk remains.
You earlier mentioned that the Western world's attention to rare earth security has intensified in recent years. Obviously, this has a lot to do with de-risking their supply chain, given China's dominance being a single country controlling the value chain. Can you talk about the sort of approaches Western governments have been taking to establish an ex-China rare earth supply chain?
Now, we've seen in 2025 that Western reliance on China for rare earths has been a clear vulnerability for these governments and their critical mineral security plans, of course, especially with tariff driven tensions translating into pronounced actual supply risks last year. So, this sustained risk is likely to catalyze a faster, broader pivot towards rare earth security, accelerating Western investment across the value chain and the formation of strategic partnerships within these countries to lock in future supply. Now, industrial policy is going to aim to establish a resilient ex China rare earth supply chain. And these policies vary across different Western governments. Looking at the US only, the US government has mobilized a coordinated multi agency effort to establish a fully integrated domestic mine to magnet supply chain by 2027. These include direct project financing, grants, permitting reform, production tax credits, and long term offtake agreements, reflecting a significant ramp up in government intervention to secure critical mineral supply chains. Now, this started long ago, not just last year. It started under Trump 1.0. It was accelerated under Biden, and now it's being turbocharged under Trump 2.0. The government is also undertaking an active role in these strategic industries with private players. So they're investing in and owning companies now, private companies that are deemed strategically important. So examples of these are the US government's 10% equity ownership in Intel and Trilogy Mining. One of the most significant investments we've seen last year is also the US government becoming the largest shareholder in MP Materials, which is the operator of the Mountain Pass mine in California, which is the nation's only active rare earth mining site. I believe they also acquired a 5% equity stake in Lithium Americas later on. So just like the US, the EU has also mirrored such initiatives. Central to the EU strategy is to increase rare earth security through the Critical Raw Materials Act, CRMA. This seeks to bolster the resilience of supply chains through a combination of onshoring supply, production, import diversification, and increased recycling capacity. Similar strategies also exist for Canada and Australia. But despite all these initiatives, right, China has the advantage of time, as I mentioned earlier. Most of the Western narratives still focus on access to reserves and mines, but China controls the midstream. So until this midstream dependence is broken, diversification will remain a narrative and not a hedge for sure. So just to put things into perspective, building independent processing capacity takes a decade or more.
Right. But which region outside of China do you see could potentially become the most credible alternative to China?
So China is poised to retain its leading role for the next decade at least, but to think of a credible alternative region-wise, I think Asia will maintain its dominance, and this is because even if you're not accounting for China, we have Australia and Malaysia who are advancing their rare earth supply diversification outside of China. Primarily, this is going to be led by Linus Rare Earths, the company, with Australia boasting a robust pipeline of upstream and midstream projects as well. Malaysia has marked a milestone as the first producer of separated heavy rare earths, rare earth oxides outside of China. And Obviously, we spoke about Myanmar. Myanmar also remains the second largest source for rare earths, both regionally and globally, despite all its political and regulatory instability. So yes, Asia as a region will retain its dominance.
Other than a significant amount of time that is required, are there other obstacles do you expect from, those other countries, Western governments to establish an ex-China supply chain?
Well, challenges remain the fact that China already has a lot of the technical expertise. They have most of the reserves. So if the Western governments are to, ensure that they go completely off their dependence on China, they would have to build a lot of strategic partnerships globally. And that is fine. There are a lot of governments aligned with the US and Europe, or just Europe in general. So Australia could aid them significantly, building partnerships with Australia because Australia holds reserves. Vietnam, going forward, even India has reserves. So there are opportunities. But I think just to assume that all these industrial policies would ensure a fully resilient rare earth supply chain without depending on China, to assume that would be quite naive, I would say.
Well, while the Western push for a resilient ex-China supply chain is ongoing and will take a lot of time, I think China has at the same time tightened its grip over rare earth exports by introducing export restrictions in April 2025. And China tightened the restrictions again in October 2025. How do you see these moves from China impacting the global supply chain and the mineral prices?
So at BMI, we forecast praseodymium, neodymium prices, oxide prices, and we believe largely that lagging new supply outside of mainland China for now, and the weaponization of rare earths as a geopolitical lever beyond just their industrial applications will reinforce the upward momentum in prices through sentiment channels for PR&D. So regulatory developments and Beijing's protectionist rhetoric will remain a central theme for the rare earths industry, keeping the market on edge. In the longer term, we do expect the market to enter a structural deficit, sending prices much higher to reach closer to $125,000-$130,000 per ton by 2030. And although emerging rare earth free alternatives within the EV and wind power markets pose a bit of an uncertainty for demand for rare earths, presenting downside risks to this price outlook, stronger demand for rare earth permanent magnet technologies should still keep prices buoyant well into 2030.
If we look ahead, your forecast suggests some gradual diversification in mining, but not a near-term in China's grip. What would be the key indicators that you'll be watching to judge whether China's position is genuinely starting to weaken or whether its dominance is just simply evolving?
So there are a few indicators anybody can watch. There are a few indicators that we are currently monitoring for that matter. So for one, whether any new rare earth reserves are being found globally, like through exploration activities, whether these new reserves are economical to mine, which is very important. Sometimes they're not economical, right? They're too expensive, so it's not worth it, and the projects are left alone. If they're economical, what is the production capacity of these projects? Do these projects actually come into fruition, even though they're announced? In the end, do they come into fruition? Are they operational or not? Two, are there any major rare earth processing facilities that are built anywhere? Where are they getting their feedstocks from? Again, from China or or not? So three, then we can look at trade flows. Are there any changes in the volume of imports from China? Is China's market share of exports to certain jurisdictions being reduced and taken over by other market sources, or just reduced due to increased domestic self-sufficiency levels? So these would be the main indicators. And then obviously, if you go beyond non-data indicators, then you can see how many times the topic of rare earths is being used by China as a bargaining chip during trade talks or other during any kind of geopolitical tension with the West, because they have the ability to use this bargaining chip now. So is the frequency of that usage dropping or not? Then you can see the importance that China holds towards rare earths.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for sharing your great insights, Sabrin. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. And I look forward to more knowledge and insight sharing from you about the rare earth industry in the future.
You've been listening to Fitch Ratings China Perspectives podcast. To learn more about our ratings and research on China, visit us at fitchratings.com. Subscribe to China Perspectives wherever you get your podcasts.